The theme of this digital fireside is meaningful enterprise. As Paul mentioned during the last fireside where we discussed renewal, many of our members are drawn to MarketingKind at moments of transition in their careers. For some, this transition has been accelerated with the impact of the pandemic, making many of us, myself included, do some soul searching and look at how we can become more meaningful and impactful, both inside and outside of our work lives. Work provides many things over and above the monthly paycheck. It offers a sense of identity and status, community and social connection, doing tasks that we find stimulating, and the opportunity to make a positive contribution to society. All of these things make work feel meaningful and purposeful, and are increasingly important in the world we face today. Against the backdrop of the pandemic, the climate crisis, Black Lives Matter, global poverty, and gender inequality, among many societal issues we face, the purpose of business and its role in society has become increasingly important. People's values have changed, and the way they want to reflect them in as well as outside of work. Growing public demand, coupled with the momentum of major brands and people of influence championing purposeful business, is having a galvanizing effect, highlighting that business can and must be a force for good. Millennials today represent 35% of the workforce and have expressed new expectations of who they want to work for, buy from, and invest in. They want to work for companies that stand for something and have a purpose, as they see business as being an integral part to making positive changes in the world. In a recent Deloitte survey, millennial workers were asked what the primary purpose of businesses should be. Over 63% said improving society rather than generating profit. Andy Briggs, CEO at insurance provider Phoenix Group, predicts that there will be a shift in the way success is measured, with employees and job candidates likely to judge a business based on its contribution to society, the environment, or the satisfaction of their people, rather than its profitability. Businesses who can engage and inspire employees as well as customers with their purpose can grow people and teams that are happier, more productive and innovative, and who can become powerful advocates for brands. 75% of millennials say that they would take a pay cut to work for a more responsible company, and 73% of people working in a purpose-driven business are engaged. So what makes work meaningful? How do we become more purposeful and impactful professionals? How can we have a meaningful impact on the people we serve? And how can we make our organisations more purpose-driven? To help us explore some of these questions, we are joined by our fellow MarketingKind member, Dr. Mick Jackson. A serial entrepreneur, author, and ex-chart-topping rock singer, Mick is first and foremost the leading champion of compassionate disruption. His work has been recognised globally. He has received numerous honorary doctorates and is the second only recipient of the highly prestigious Social Innovator Award from Babson College, the world's top school for entrepreneurship. He was the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year in 2016 and is listed in the Meaningful Business 100. As founder and CEO, Mick has led WildHearts to become a leading global B2B social business and in the top 10% of B Corps globally. WildHearts is signatory to the Global Compact, and their work addresses over 50% of the UN's global goals. WildHearts have transformed 1.5 million lives to date, and they are not stopping there. Welcome, Mick. It's really great to see you again.
Thank you so much. That was very nice intro. Thank you very much, Mindy.
You're very welcome. It's all very well deserved. So Mick, I really loved listening to your Business for Good podcast series, and in particular, I liked the way you kicked those off by getting to know the real person behind the very big job title. So with that in mind, can you tell us a bit about your background and what the key influences were that have helped shape you and where you are today?
Yeah, you know, it's a very well made point, Mindy. I have the privilege, and I count my peers in MarketingKind amongst those people, that I get to talk about things that matter with people that care. And it's not just that they care enough to do something about it. And the reason for the WildHearts Business for Good podcast series was, I thought, imagine if we made these conversations common knowledge. And so we started interviewing friends and customers of WildHearts who were in very significant positions of influence. But to your point, we didn't want to talk about their position and all this, it can be a bit boring, right? I was really interested in who are they and why do they do what they do and how do they do it, and the insights. I mean, people that from the outside you would think were just captains of industry would talk about how they were carers for their partner who had mental health issues or had significant health concerns. Some of them were from significantly deprived backgrounds, had dealt with Well, one of them, as you know, Robin Syndrome, and Nestle was chased by skinheads in the 80s because he was Sri Lankan. You can think, who knew these stories? And so I think when we talk about meaningful business and we talk about making a contribution and impact, it does, if you're going to do it authentically, at least in my experience, compel you to understand who you are and why you are, because that will guide you to the impact that you're best placed to deliver. And we all have so much more in common, but we all have our unique backstories, if you will. And I think that my upbringing in the west coast of Scotland, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm from the west. And my family was Irish immigrants, but also immigrants from the Highlands. And that sounds a bit odd to say, well, I don't know, immigrants from the Highlands, but it's such a different culture in the Highlands. So we were Highlanders and Irish, so that kind of explains a bit of my nature, to say the least. I like to say we're completely nuts, but at least we can laugh about it. You know what I mean? And but I think I grew up with that sense of, it was a very working class background, and being, especially stories of my Irish grandfathers, a real sense of being the outcast and not being welcome, and very much an immigrant story. So my father was raised in a slum in Glasgow, and he's got the knife wounds, or he had the knife wounds to prove it. I mean, it was brutal. But he always brought me up. This is one line, said, "Son, we were poor, but we never felt poor." And that's the difference. The other side was my mother. Again, her father was from Ireland, and she was from a poor background, but she just had this entrepreneurial zeal. And when I was 3 years old, she set up a business when her kids were toddlers. And I saw, without knowing, the impact of someone having the courage to go way beyond their comfort zone. And she set up a business, and the life that I had compared to my peers was completely different from theirs. And I think I didn't know as a young kid, but if I was ever going to go into business, I would be most fulfilled in social business, because I had this idea of, you have to look after people who have got significant challenges. Like, we have to look after each other. But entrepreneurship in a family setting can be so positively transformative. And I just had that in my DNA. So it was entrepreneurship, but very much grounded in a working class West Coast of Scotland background. And I think the influence in that in me, it is in my DNA, well, literally.
Absolutely. So I guess building on that, can you then sort of take us forward a little bit, and in terms of the chain of influence and sort of key events and experiences that led you to where you are today?
I think I'm the product of social mobility. I mean, as a kid, there was so many things that I just thought was normal for me, but I was brought up in a new town in the outskirts of Glasgow, which had been set up for people who wanted to get out of the slums and the terrible housing conditions in post-industrial Glasgow. But I was reading a history book about it recently, and they described that these new towns were for the, quote, upwardly mobile working class. It was for the aspirational working class. So there was no private schools. There was no good or bad areas. It was almost like a social experiment. And the kids that came out of these towns, my friends are world authorities in geology and chemistry, but they were from little housing estates. And we didn't realize that we were these little guinea pigs. So I am a product of social mobility, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. That kids like us from poor backgrounds were raised to believe, work hard, that's the key, and you really can do anything. So that's one product. And the other thing was the influence. I mean, my dad was great, but my mum, the fact that she set up a business, the fact that my sisters followed in her footsteps, and we all went to university because that was really important to my mum and my dad. But then my sisters went on to set up their own businesses, and then I set up my own business. So I think the influence of my mother and that entrepreneurial dynamism is absolutely fundamental. I have always been a bit of a reprobate, though, and I didn't have a job until I was about 27 because I was a singer in a rock band. And I still play guitar, but it's really intense rock guitar, and I play piano and stuff. And I joke, I've got two sons, and if they ever want to rebel against me, they become auditors because they're both learning rock, and they don't have a choice. It's like after the homework, they sit down and do rock with me. And if I can instill that in them, then my job's done. So I did that until I was about 25. But on the tour bus, I was reading history and reading business and studying. I studied business at university, but I didn't really learn anything there. And maybe I wasn't in the right frame of mind to learn. I mean, I had long hair and leather trousers, and I like to think I made that look work, but I'm not so sure. But even while I was studying, I was rehearsing constantly. And so when I graduated, I went off on tour and did my thing. And but that's where I cut my teeth in business. Because, for example, we released our own records and we got them into the charts, but we were doing it all ourselves. So the whole thing about how do we convince this international famous musician to record our single? How do we get into the charts? How do we get on the radio? How do we do? It was all entrepreneurial startups, but I was doing it following my passion in music. And that was until I was about 25, 26. I realized that I'd grown out of it. I didn't want to live a life of petrified adolescence. And I just kind of thought, I've kind of done this and I don't know why I want to do it anymore. And at that point, I was a wee bit lost because I thought I tried to fit in a big corporate world. I just couldn't do it. And another thing I'm immensely grateful for is in my late 20s, the dot-com era was building up. And that's how I got my break. That was the breakout opportunity. And I built up a recruitment website for the founders. And after 3 years, it was sold for 9.7 million. And they said to me, whatever you want to do, we'll back you. And that was my break.
Amazing, excellent. And you mentioned previously, when we've spoken previously, so the influence of music actually on you as a businessman. And can you talk to us a little bit about how it sort of, you feel that it's kind of sparked your creativity?
Well, I know we'll come on to the microtackle method, which is our way of teaching entrepreneurial thinking. And that was a long journey to develop that. But in stage one of, when people say, you know, I want to set up my own business or I want to create impact in my business, etc., we always start with who are you and why do you do what you do. Now, you can sound a bit like Yoda by kind of, you know, as if you're trying to take people on this self-indulgent philosophical journey, like, who are you? But we see, unless you get an understanding of that, you may find yourself like a featherweight boxer trying to compete in a heavyweight competition. Like, it's not you. You don't have the right physicality. You see it in sport. Everybody's got their position for a reason. And yeah, I think in the past we've been so obsessed with positions and income and how do you afford a house in the right area. You go, oh, that's the right job for you. You go, that income level may afford that lifestyle, but she is not the person to do that. That's not where her passion and her talents lie. And you will be like a fish out of water. And so by understanding who you are and why you're like that, and that's a lifetime's journey, that leads you to the best place for you to apply your strengths, and through applying your strengths to manifest your values. And through the microtackle method, and why as I refined it, it came back over and over and over that my overwhelming value, apart from things like my family, etc., was creativity. Mm. Now, the relevance of that is people say, I want to go into business, or I want to set up my own business. Go, you're doing what? There's a reason I'm not in the operations team. There's a reason I'm not in the finance team. My auditor, who then became our FD, is incredibly creative within that sphere of numbers. He says he's not, but he really is. I couldn't even conceive of doing what he does. But then he thinks I'm nuts, the way I just come up with these ideas. We are creative in different ways, but my form of creativity, there's a reason that I come up with the new ideas. It's like being in a band, right? You get the team together, you come up with a new idea, you refine it, you polish it, you socialize it, you then perform it, if you will, and then the next idea and the next idea. And if I wasn't doing that, even though I was creating social impact, I wouldn't be as effective as what I do in my current role, because I wouldn't be playing the right part within the team. So as I got older, I realized that my metaphor for business is the exact same as playing the guitar or writing songs. I don't write songs anymore, but when I did, in my mind, it's the same thing. And that's, if I was to, for example, get the chance to be the chairman of whatever and earn X million a year doing X, Y, and Z, you go, nah. I'm now self-aware enough to go, one, I might be able to do it, but I'll struggle and I won't enjoy it. So no thanks. It has to be a very specific place where I'm best likely to be of greatest value.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So if we can talk a bit more specifically now about how and why you founded the WildHearts group of companies, and how you, I guess, what the inspiration for that was, and how you're manifesting your mission of business for good you talk us through sort of kind of the key inspiration for where WildHearts came from?
So I was very fortunate in that I think if I was to give myself credit for anything, right? I mean, Mindy, it always cracks me up. So you get these famous entrepreneurs that say, "Oh, I did it, and it was all me," and I'm just, you're like, "Oh God." It's just like the ultimate statement of lack of self-awareness, right? Is that if I could take credit for anything, is that when I was given an opportunity, I really, really grabbed it. But the opportunities were around me to grab. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I got the chance to launch my own .com businesses, the guys that I'd been working with, they were such good role models. And that's another thing we're obsessed with in the Mike Tycho method. We call it the Trinity of Influence. Power of role models. I learned from them how to set up businesses without needing external investment because I watched them do it. They didn't know they were my role models. I was just observing them ferociously while they were doing it. So I learned how to then launch a business out of their infrastructure, and it was an outdoor sports business because I did a lot of climbing, etc. So the idea of the sense of personal freedom, sense of, your destiny is your own, and, being your own boss and all that stuff, I'd fulfilled that part of me. It's not easy, but it's like being a parent. You go, it's going to take a lot of commitment. You go, yeah, but I'm up for it. Like the hours are intense, but you wouldn't change it for the world. So I think I view running your own business like that. That bit, I thought I was fulfilled. It was the bit that I didn't know was missing. The idea of entrepreneurship with a greater service to humanity. I didn't know that existed. I hadn't conceived of it. It was when I went on a climbing expedition in Kashmir. It was a French climbing expedition in 2001. I got the chance to go and climb, I'm going to try and climb two mountains, two 8,000 meter peaks. One was called Broad Peak, and its next door neighbor, they literally join at the bottom with similar base camps as K2. And I went off to try and climb them. I always say men climb mountains because they can't give birth. Guys are always trying to prove something, and I was like, "Well, I'm going to try and climb these mountains." So off I went. But life presented me with the experience I think that I needed, rather than what I thought I was going for. So I was physically ready. Nothing happened to me, but it was what was going on around me that compelled me to respond. And the context to create the impact, to express the impact of what this did to me was that ahead of me, and there was an expedition, another French expedition. There was a young boy. He was only 18 years old, young French boy, and he was found dead in his tent. Now, it takes a week from the middle of nowhere in northern Kashmir. You walk for a week over the ice to get to these mountains. They're not near anything. And this young boy was found dead because of the pressure on his brain at the altitude. And the Pakistani military scrambled a helicopter to evacuate his corpse. And I'll never forget seeing his body strapped to the helicopter as it went over the ice past it. I became very good friends with my guide and effectively became my bodyguard. He didn't speak English, I don't speak Urdu, but we just connected, and he was an amazing guy called Cher. And about 6 weeks or so later, he collapsed during the expedition. And we were told that his lungs had collapsed. And if he wasn't down from that altitude within 24 hours, he was going to die. So I said, well, let's get him one of the helicopters. And at that point, I was told that no one was coming. And no matter how much I begged and radioed and tried to raise hell, there was no one coming. And the simple reason I would ask you is, what's the difference between a dead Westerner and a live, desperately needed Kashmiri tribesman? And he couldn't afford it. Yeah. That was it. And he saw me from my reaction, what was happening, and he just folded in on himself. He just accepted it, and he just folded his arms and bowed his head. And I lost my temper. And I organized some of the other porters and sent them off ahead, and they started setting up camps, and I just kind of got them on my shoulder and did my best to get them out, which we did. It took us 4 days. And I would catch up with the team ahead, and they'd get into the camp. And then there was hours and hours of us just stumbling over these glaciers together. And all I could think of that whole time, when it's like minus 40 at night and plus 40 during the day in the most brutal environment, was the only reason we're going through this is because a man is judged by how much money he has. And I swore to myself that if I got home, because I didn't realize it, but I was in a significantly bad state physically. I was coughing up blood and stuff because of the altitude. If I got home, I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to reimagine my businesses and I'm going to use them to help people. And I got home and WildHearts is the fulfillment of that.
Amazing. So let's talk a bit about the different WildHearts businesses then. Can you briefly mentioned MicroTyco, but what about the other parts of the company and how they're sort of manifesting business for good?
These are great questions, Mindy. So MarketingKind came later, right? And I hope what my answer now will maybe be more of service to the people that have joined us in terms of when we talk about why you do what you do and your mission and your values. When I used to hear that stuff before I launched WildHearts, I thought it was kind of a bit consultancy, a bit kind of, yeah, but we're trying to make money, right? We're trying to pay the rent. I didn't get the connection. Yet now, almost the answer to every single business challenge I come across is, well, why are we doing this? Your why becomes your North Star. It guides your strategy, it gets you started, it keeps you going, but it does more than that. It helps you very quickly ascertain, should we do this one or this one? It's like, no, it's obvious we're going to do A because B is not aligned with our Y. So let me give you an example of that. So my founding idea was, okay, I want to use business to help people. I didn't know social enterprise existed. I never knew there was such a thing. I'd come from the entrepreneurial world. I hadn't come from the third sector. That was the first thing. I also didn't want to ask for donations because I didn't want to compete with charities. I would feel that as a bit of a hollow victory. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to use business to help people. And that was my founding obsession. I just wouldn't let go. How do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this? And I looked at all these different ideas. And then one day I was in an office of this woman, she was a chief exec, a good friend of mine. I looked around her desk and there was all this stationery and files. And I said, how much do you spend on all this crap? And she said, I don't know. And then I said, who'd you buy it from? She goes, I don't know. And then I said, do you care? And she said, why would I? And that was it. I thought, see if I could get you this stuff at the same price for the right service. But I didn't know what or how I was going to do it. But I used the profits to help people. Would you buy from me? She went, yeah, of course I would. That was it. Now, I'd never sold paper clips in my life, but if you set up a marketing agency, how many ways can you differentiate yourself? Or a law firm, or a prop? There's so many companies that people go, okay, we like that you're trying to do good, but are you any good? What if your marketing campaign's crap, right? Like, no one cares where this stuff comes. It's all the same stuff. It comes from, no matter what labels they put on it or logo, it's all the same stuff. It comes from all the same factories, and no one has any emotional attachment to it. But I'd also written a book when I came back on Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan and stuff. I'd written a book about these historical characters and in the lessons you could learn from them. And it's interesting when I look back on the one on Alexander the Great, I was fascinated by his driving force of his mission and what he was trying to do and why he was trying to do it. And as I read back on it, what I was trying to do on a deeper level was address something simultaneously. I wanted to create the revenue from a commoditized business that we could imbue with meaning. But I also did a lot of talks at conferences then. And people would come up to me and say things like, I'd love to do this, but I'm just and they would fill in the blanks in the most bizarre way. They'd say things like, I'm just the chief exec. You're like, oh, that's quite a big deal, actually. Or I'm just the head counsel, or I'm just in the marketing team. And then you get that, I'm just the office junior. And I'm like, no, you're not just anything. Don't think about yourself like that. And what I want to do is to say, okay, what unites every single person in that business? The little mundane office products that they use to do their jobs. So if we can imbue the humblest, most boring product with deep meaning, then the little strapline was, WildHearts, even a bad day at the office saves lives. And we used to get people getting really emotional about it. There was one company that tried to change suppliers and they faced this little mutiny in the office because everybody rebelled, right? Because we said you can imbue the most mundane products with meaning. So that's why we launched that business. And it's grown at 34%, 24%, 34%, 51% in a flat, commoditized, moribund market. We grew at 51% last year, or just the year before the lockdown. And the brands that we've won during lockdown, such as BNP Paribas and Siemens, and I could go on, are all switching to us. So if someone say, how do we deliver, double-digit growth in a flat market, I go, yeah, why are you doing it? Dedicate your company to helping the excluded. What? Well, yeah, it's not the answer they expect, but that's how you'll deliver that kind of growth. For example, the goal was to bring meaning to the mundane and to connect everybody within the business and make it our customers, such as Nestle, describe buying from us as a no-brainer. And the closer you can get to your customer going, that's a no-brainer, then you've done your job right in the preparation of it. All right, so here's the point. I launched the business because my background was launching businesses, and I wanted to harness the wealth that businesses spent on a daily basis. So that's the whole business ethos. So then what do you do with the profit? You follow your values. So your values aren't, we did it to get motivated, or we did it to attract staff, but then we kind of put them in the bottom drawer. No, what should you do with the money? And that the what we do with the profits, the first thing we did was such a graceful manifestation of my own personal values of how I got started. I found out, and by the way, see, when you get on this journey about who you are and how business can create impact in a way that's right for you, the journey it takes you on is so enriching, because I learned stuff that I should have learned in business school and no one even mentioned it, that 75% of the world's population of women were completely excluded from finance. It's like a financial apartheid, that women were the poorest in every country on the earth. You go, okay. And then not only that, but the violence that was inflicted upon them as a result, the social injustices because of their economic disempowerment, was just something that we live with on a daily basis. And there's no protest marches, no one talks about it, because it's banking. And yet, if you empower women economically, just like my mother was, just as the women who are on these screens today are, if you just provide them with the banking system that we all take for granted, they transform their communities. They don't need charity. They don't need motivational seminars. Once you give them access to finance, you just get these little microeconomic booms in all these little villages through sub-Saharan Africa, Haiti, India, all the places we were. And so when I found out that you could lend money at compassionate and effective interest rates, you obviously have to do it right, because there are people trying to indulge in usury in this sector, doing it for the wrong reasons. But a properly run bank that empowers the poorest people, specifically women, it's sustainable loans and business training to help them thrive. You end up dealing with child nutrition issues in the issue. You deal with educational issues. You deal with domestic violence because the women have support networks and they're powerful out with the whole. All these social scourges are addressed through empowering the woman economically. The money's paid back. She becomes a local role model, and the cycle goes on. I thought, wait a minute, I'm the product of an empowered businesswoman. You saying we can do this in places like Malawi and rural India? Okay, that's the thing for WildHearts. So the businesses, profits, funded businesses. And so the cycle continued. And that's why we began to focus there. We gave the gift of entrepreneurial, the opportunity to be entrepreneurs to the most financially excluded people in the world. And they are the most reliable people to lend to. We have 0.5% portfolio at risk in banking. It's almost unheard of. And yet we're lending to people who can't sign for their loans, who can't sign their names, have no collateral, no formal ID, nothing. And yet they pay back at a rate that no other demographic does. It's genuinely transformative.
Absolutely. That's where we it touches upon some other elements of what you do at WildHearts, and I think this around sort of this theme of inclusion. When we've spoken previously, you sort of talked about identifying the vulnerable and helping to lift them, which is exactly what you've done with the microfinance piece. But also, what I really love about some of the work you're doing is with children and giving them a voice and a seat at the table, and really this concept of inclusivity. Can we sort of talk a bit about that and kind of where Micro came from, and really sort of elevating these more vulnerable groups in society?
So it's interesting. Do you ever, the marketing knowledge in MarketingKind is formidable. And every time I speak to Anna and Paul, I always come away going, my God, I thought I was just phoning up to arrange something, and now I'm thinking about some philosophical concept. in marketing. But you know, people say, how do you distill what you do down to one word? And I thought, oh, you can't do that. And then I began to think about, what does WildHearts actually do? What do we do, right? And from that, we came out with the word empowerment, that we empower people at the right point for them. So we don't, for example, look after the elderly. We don't have no skill set in that. We don't, when God forbid there's a horrendous natural disaster and aid agencies go there, we don't do that. That's not what we're designed to do, and we don't have the expertise to do that. We realized that where we were always naturally drawn to is, how do we intervene at the right stage to give that person the agency to take control of their own life? And so therefore, empowering the women economically, and they take care of their own kids. What mother doesn't, right? That was the right thing there. That's why we, for example, manufacture and distribute reusable sanitary pads to the most vulnerable girls in South Africa, because we found out that we're dropping out of school. The daughters of our clients were dropping out of school. And we think, well, that's insane. But for the price of a cup of coffee, you can keep a girl in school for a year through the reusable sanitary pads that we manufacture and distribute. So it's empowering the girl to take control of her own education. Our customers, we got our partners, get very animated. I'm very, very fortunate about how close we are to our customers and how engaged they are with our mission, because they say that WildHearts does it. We don't. We're repurposing your spend. We're all doing it together. And so they would say to us, well, what are we going to do in the UK? Are you going to provide access to banking for entrepreneurs in the UK? But we don't need to do that in the UK. The UK is more than served with startup loans and credit unions. And it's not the same environment. It's not the best place to empower people in this culture. And I obsessed about that. And how do we do this? And where I came back to was, again, my own upbringing, social mobility. Let's empower our own kids with the tools they need for social mobility and to become the responsible entrepreneurial business leaders of the future. And that's where MarketingKind came from. I took a step back and thought, right, why is it? It was twofold. It was coming from executives. How do we get our people to feel fully committed to work? How do we get our people to feel more engaged? How can we get them to release their talents, their entrepreneurial talents? At the same time, I was like, why is it the postcode you're born to in the UK is a pretty strong indicator of where you're going to end up? That's obscene. How do we address that? And again, my own upbringing, my own experience, and especially in microfinance, is I saw the transformative power of business. And therefore, that's why I created MarketingKind. We distilled the entrepreneurial behaviors and mindsets that entrepreneurs exhibit. And my biggest influence was Babson College. And that's why I was so over the moon when they gave us the Babson Prize, because I had the privilege of studying with them in Switzerland, and then they invited me to go to Boston. And they said something I'd never heard before, which is entrepreneurs, the idea that it's an identity is a myth. And they had all the evidence to prove that. It is a way of thinking. It's a way of acting into the world. And again, like musical notes, to me, you can learn the behavior and you can practice them. So I was so inspired by that. And I created the MarketingKind method. And when I went back to Boston next time and I showed them the video of all these little school kids, little 10-year-olds, producing the most incredible results through our methodology. And the team at Babson just looked at me and went, my God, you're actually bringing to life everything we stand for in these little 10-year-olds. And that's why MarketingKind was how we bring to life our work in this country. How can we empower kids from housing estates in Manchester and London and Glasgow to realize that they can achieve what they want in business, if they want to go into business. And even if it's not business, they can use that same entrepreneurial thinking in medicine or education or social care. And how do we create these empowered kids? And that's where the methodology came from. There's now 3 stages of it. There's MarketingKind for schools, which is delivered free for all school kids. I don't believe that people should have to pay. So 50,000 kids have taken part through that. But we also have MarketingKind for early careers. So by way of example, Nestle, Barclays, Zurich Insurance, they train their apprentices, their graduates in our program. Barclays, it's thousands of apprentices and graduates globally have gone through our program. And then we also now have MarketingKind for leaders, which trains execs, and the results they produce utterly jaw-dropping. And these are people in HR or operations that when you teach them the notes of entrepreneurial thinking, give them a chance to practice it, and at its core, they're going to come up with a solution that delivers real tangible benefits in their communities or their business. The talent that just erupts is quite remarkable. And it was always there. It just wasn't being tapped into. So that's where MicroTyco came from in our own culture. And our goal is if WildHearts, this little company, can transform over 1.5 million lives. And as I like your intro, we're just getting started, right? If we can help over 1.5 million people, what if we inspired 1 million kids to grow up to do that? Then that's when you get real systemic, meaningful change. And I share your passion when what you were saying at the intro. I believe we do have to redefine the definition of business. That I think the opportunities of the future, there's no point creating shareholder value and living in a penthouse if your kids are getting threatened in the street and you can't breathe the air. That's a life of poverty. I think the true wealth creators of the future will be the ones that create wealth in the truest sense. Mental health and well-being for the people that they can influence, sustainable environmental issues, sustainable, meaningful connections in community. I think the people who use entrepreneurial thinking to address those issues, they'll be the heroes of the future, and they'll be my heroes because they'll help create the world I want my sons to grow up in. The days of having the big golden tower and sitting at the top and thinking that people admire you are well gone, and thank God. Yeah, thank God.
So in terms of, you've talked about the MicroTyco initiative and particularly the enabling of children. I actually attended one of the WildHearts webinars on parenting teens. And so I really loved the approach, the sort of very holistic approach that you're taking. So you're not just actually educating the children, you're educating the mothers and the fathers as well as to how we can help our children be motivated by more intrinsic value. So do you think that, so many of us, actually I'll rephrase that, so many of us are obviously looking to find meaning in our work as we go through our lives, but with the MicroTyco initiative and actually just, in the way that we're all, many of us are choosing to raise our children today, do you think we're actually raising a generation who will naturally find meaning in their work? They will naturally be drawn to more purpose-led businesses?
Well, your stats at the start were very interesting. We would talk about the fact that Deloitte's research at 75% of the global workforce by 2025 will want to work for a company that contributes to society. As if that was some kind of precious knowledge. Companies aren't brands; they're made up of people, right? So I would speak to chief executive, and we talk about compassionate disruption. And we'd say, the evidence is clear that consumers overwhelmingly want brands to contribute to society in a meaningful way, an authentic way. Your future talent, we talk about the war for talent, the best talent want to work for those companies, and your current teams want that. So as the leader, are you interested in attracting customers, attracting the best talent, and motivating your teams? Because if you're not, you're a bit of a crap leader, aren't you? I think you need to go because it's your job. So if that's what people want, this isn't we should do something because it's quite nice or it'll look good in the brochures or I personally have a vocation to do it. It's a case of these are now business imperatives. We were saying that 10 years ago. And now there's articles in The Economist about it. Now, I'm not saying we were saying it amongst many other people, but it's becoming common knowledge now. So I think there's so many elements to this, and I want to touch on what you were saying about mental health because it's key to the MicroTyco structure of what we do, the 3 pillars that it's built on. But your point, I think that we talk about increasing poverty and we talk about increasing injustice in our culture, but we have to put it in the context that the vast majority of us are exponentially wealthier than our grandparents ever were, and what they went through. So my sons, my son's grandparents were from the Punjab and the other half are Irish Scots, right? They were both immigrant communities that came to the UK, but it's the usual immigrant story. They had like £10 in their pockets. They had nothing. So you see it with a lot of immigrants, right? The first generation, like they've all to become doctors and lawyers because their mum and dad are saying, we want you to go and do this. That's the definition of success to them. I think the kids are looking saying, well, I was brought up maybe not being hungry. And I know there's some kids that don't have that luxury, but they've realized that happiness or contentment is never found in things, right? It's who you become. It's not what you get. So unless you're finding a sense of connection and fulfillment in your work, no matter what that is, you won't experience a true sense of wealth. And I'm not being simplistic about it. It's been shown overwhelmingly that once people get to a level of their basic financial needs, you can double their income and there will be a negligible increase in their sense of well-being. Double it again, it's like, yeah. Keeping the wolf from the door, yes, there's an exponential increase in people's sense of well-being once they get to that. And of course, we want to create a society where people don't have to worry about those things. But after that, to say, well, do you want a sports car or do you want this? I think, really? Like, that was always a myth. It's not going to fulfill you unless ever since you've been a kid, you've been a mechanics enthusiast and you appreciate the mechanics of sports cars, but actually driving about thinking it's going to be the source of fulfillment, it's not. I think this next generation gets this. They're also aware of things that I didn't have a bloody clue about when I was growing up. And there's so many reasons for that, but they're aware of the impact of what they're buying. So if we look at, we were doing some great work with Nestle, and it's Lauren Cooper's the reason I'm in MarketingKind, she's on the call. So the marketing team in Nestle are saying, in the 80s, you would talk about the product. Now marketers are saying, right, consumers are saying to the marketers, especially the younger ones, where did you source it? How is it sourced? How will it get here? How did it get here? And what effect will it have on my health? Now that's a totally different marketing conversation, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I think that younger generation, they will compel change. And very interesting to see how that will manifest, actually. To your point, one other point, Mindy, I actually had the global head of HR for a major bank saying to me, well, Mick, what is your talent attraction strategy? Because you consistently have these young people coming through, these graduates who are just world class. They're just the best we've came across. And I said, well, we type up a little advert and put it in the university in That's it. It's why we do what we do. It's why they're joining. You don't need a fancy poster when you're the real deal. The best people will want to join you as long as you are committed and you treat them well. And we're very fortunate that people join us so I think all brands can enjoy that the best people want to come and give their best because they're fulfilling a deeper sense of themselves. So there's so many business imperatives driving this. It's very exciting.
So building on that, there's so much talk about how purpose-led businesses perform better, employee engagement is higher, staff attraction and retention is higher. And you obviously have first-hand experience of this. I believe that in 2017, you set a goal to transform 1 million lives by the end of 2020. But you hit that goal a year and 9 months early.
This is impressive, Mindy.
I have done my homework, Mick. I have done my homework. So how did you achieve this? And do you think it's that just naturally having a really purposeful business model and people coming to work at WildHearts with meaning in their work, knowing that they're impacting lives? Do you think that's driven productivity? And how do you explain such an amazing success? Is that from the meaning behind?
So in the microcycle method, we talk a lot. One of the things about how to engage with customers, partners, is the closer your why is how quick the sale will be closed, right? So if you say, well, I can't get them to return my calls, right? I go, yeah, because your whys aren't aligned, right? So WildHearts is now in an environment where there's a fantastic organization called Social Enterprise UK. I interviewed the chief exec in a podcast yesterday, and it's an incredible podcast. They created something called the Buy Social Corporate Challenge. And it was to help large corporates to come together, and then they would commit to how much they would spend with social businesses. And there's brands like Barclays have just joined it, and Nestle, and it's been announced, Nestle are joining it. Zurich Insurance and all these top brands have made this public commitment that they want to spend money specifically with social businesses, like the legal structure of a social business. So therefore, when we're speaking to these people, do you know how you've made this commitment to all your customers and stakeholders at the C-suite level? Well, we're a social business. It's just there. So that it's no surprise the vast majority either are or are becoming our customers. So it's not because I'm greatly persuasive and I'm going out and speaking to all these people. There's this trajectory of people moving in the same direction. And one of the challenges is business people, and to the business people listening, if you're somebody like the head of sustainable purchasing at Nestle, and you say, right, I want to spend X million with social businesses, there's very few large B2B social businesses. So therefore, they do find themselves in a bit of a challenge where they say, well, there's not enough people to put my budget with. So WildHearts can look after multi-million-pound contracts, but there's not a lot of social enterprises at that B2B level that can do that. So the challenge, the thing that keeps me awake at night in a good way is what brands and companies can I launch to harness that spend, because they want to spend the money, but they don't want to spend the money and then close the drawer and that's it, done. You then report on your impact. So we have people, putting WildHearts impact report to them in their annual reports and telling all their staff. So we said, by the way, you believed in us that we would use your spend to create social impact. This is how many people we helped. This is the stat. These are the stats. This is the impact. These are the photographs, and we bring it to life for them. And then when you have another service that you want to bring to the table, you're pushing through an open door. So we are moving in the direction of travel with brands and more people who are looking for credible ways to bring to life their spend that creates social impact. And we're, as a result of sowing the seeds for years, we're best placed to do that.
Amazing. And so
one other thing, Mindy, just one thing. I was talking to one of our partners, and he was talking to me, and he said, how many people are in the WildHearts team? And I told him, and he just shook his head. He's like, how do you do that? Well, we don't need huge departments like you do, because our impact is our story. Do you know what I mean? There's so many departments that they had that we didn't need. And so it's incredibly lean and very, very efficient as an entrepreneurial model. But also our team are so engaged and so committed that they're just more productive. So if you get to those of you saying, well, how will I bring to life my values and create impact? When you're manifest, and it can sound simplistic or maybe a wee bit motivational, but when you're bringing to life your values through your work in a meaningful way, and I say we started selling paper clips, so it doesn't have to be fancy, in a way that resonates with you personally. You don't feel like you're working. You feel like you're listening to your favorite music or playing your favorite sport. And therefore, do you want to compete against somebody like that? If you can't wait to get out the door at 5:30 and they're going all night and still thinking about it because it fulfills them so much. It's a difference in mentality. And it's quite alarming to compete against somebody that committed if you're not.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm conscious of time and that we're about to break into the pair work. But before we do that, I wanted to ask what advice you would give to individuals trying to make the work more meaningful. Where do people start, particularly if you're founder and CEO of your own company, so you can champion meaning through the business. But if you're not in that sort of position, where do you start to imbue your work with more meaning?
Okay. So a couple of points on that. I was asked to do a talk by a friend of my FD they were in the audit team together in one of the big finance firms before they both went on to become FDs in different companies. And he asked if I would do a talk to his finance team. So it was all the finance team of different levels. And when I took them through, and it wasn't, listen, I'm from the West Coast. I go just a simple cause and effect, that I took them through the fact that WildHearts could not do what it does without credible finance team behind it. So the credible expression of the numbers that we have, the way our impact is audited by our team, the way that we make sure the business is run to such a degree that it is sustainable and profitable, and how we communicate those numbers to the FD of a multinational whose team will look at and go, these numbers stack up. WildHearts are doing what they say they do. That's not me. That's my FD and his team. So and then when you look at the number, it's banking that helps. For example, when we started, we run the biggest bank. Our foundation owns the biggest bank for empowering the rural poor women in Malawi, for example. That's finance professionals. So the idea of the founder and the chief exec being the one that can say, well, I feel fulfilled because I started it. I can't do it without the people in the team. So they make that connection to the mission that I started, if you will, but it's as much theirs as mine. Mm. So the first question is, how can you connect to that deeper mission? Then people might say, well, it's easy for you to say, or, well, we're not working in medical care or whatever, but we started off selling stationery. So if I can get brilliant young women with first-class honours in business who are just absolute world-class, really passionate about a stationery business, It's the why you do what you do. And it brings us right back. Why are you doing it? And you can get a connection if in your mind, and it's personal, really personal to you. No one on the outside would know that you think it. But if you can get that connection between what I do fulfills something which is of real meaning and value to me, and you can make that connection in your mind, it'll transform how you feel about what you do. And as a result, transform your performance. Similarly, you can have people in the C-suite with all the trappings and all the prestige and all the rewards that go with it, who are deeply and profoundly unfulfilled, right? So they have either lost that connection or it was never there in the first place. So it does take a lot of thinking, unless you're lucky enough that it presents you instantly, but it might mean that you have to leave where you currently work. It might. Right? I see we do microcycle with some people and they come up and go, our leaders don't align or don't behave in a way that I personally value, and go, well, it's going to be pretty hard to follow them then. That can be a reality. But sometimes you're surrounded by everything you need. You just have to reimagine how you feel about it. And that's not a platitude. WildHearts is living, breathing evidence of that. I'll say one other thing, which is credible. Again, if we look at the podcasts, and I'm delighted you listened and you enjoyed them, Mindy, the head of procurement for Johnson & Johnson did a podcast. So he's in procurement, and then Robin Syndrome in Nestle does one, and then Jeanette Evans-Turner of Zurich is about to do one. They're all saying the same things. In the past, procurement people were seen as, how do we get a good product with a reliable supply chain at the right price? And it was all that procurement stuff. As the growth in social business has emerged, they're literally the vanguards of the company's values, because where they purchase determines what they value. And there's much greater scrutiny on that. It's completely reimagined the role of procurement people, to the extent there was an article about WildHearts in Forbes magazine, a feature on Johnson & Johnson saying, will the chief procurement officer be the chief purpose officer? They were always doing that job. And indeed, Robin at Nestle said that he can go to people in the business and say, I'm going to source this for you, but have you considered we would source it from this place that actually empowers this community to do? And he sees the people looking at him going, we never knew that was possible. That is a reimagining of the role of a procurement person. They're still doing procurement. They're just doing it with a different why. And that's the challenge for all of us. Easier said than done, but then things that are worth doing usually are.
But that's also really encouraging, though, isn't it? I think, because it means that we can start small. And as you said previously, you can make the mundane meaningful, and it can start with something as simple as a paperclip. So I think it's quite encouraging.
When MicroTyco started, what we did, as you said, right, I'm aware of time, but MicroTyco now is all about creating sustainable ideas to address the global goals. When it started, what we said was we wanted to demonstrate that everybody could think entrepreneurially, and that if they were motivated, that they could make a positive, tangible difference in somebody's life, it would have a really powerful effect on releasing talents. So we gave these little 10-year-old kids £1 and called it their seed capital. It was to make their inner talents grow. That was a seed, to let them realize just how talented they were. And 100% of the money they created would fund micro entrepreneurs, and then they could study the growth in the micro entrepreneurs business. They'd literally fund their businesses, 10-year-olds. They turned their pounds into 14 grand, 9 grand, 7 grand. It was unbelievable. One of the heads of education in the government asked to see me and said, how are you doing this? We're spending a fortune in enterprise education and we're not producing results like that. And I said, why? You're teaching them how to do it, not why they should do it. You get the why right, and the talent that it will release, the alignment, the engagement, the power in people's speeches, it'll just change. You know, the 12 apostles didn't go on PowerPoint courses. Right, whether you're religious or not, the point being is when they stood up to speak, people kind of listened, right? So whether we or it was the Bolsheviks in a bad way, or Muhammad or whatever, they told stories in a way that people responded to. Nothing to do with training or trappings, all about, I have something I really, really care about and I want to tell you. And that
real mission, real mission and real purpose.